Hey, this is Assignment-Gegenheimer, and I'm in Miss Varney's Social 101 course, and this is my serial killer assignment over Charles Manson. He was born in Cincinnati, Ohio in 1934 to a Kathleen Maddox who was 16 years old and both a prostitute and an alcoholic. Manson was often moved between different relatives, foster parents, and reform schools. He would cause a lot of trouble in school. For example, when he was in the first grade, he would take his gullible classmates, mainly girls, and convince them to beat up other kids that he did not like. So when the teachers confronted him about it, he'd sit there and would say he wasn't guilty, he had nothing to do with it, he didn't fight the kids, that it was the other kids' fault, that they done it all on their own. His highest grade of education was the 7th grade. And that was when Kathleen put him in an all-boys school in Indiana, and he stayed there for about a year, and when he went to find his mother, and come to find out she did not want to have anything to do with him, so he started living on the streets, and that's when he started doing petty crimes, just to get by. At first, it was just petty theft, and then it turned into stealing bikes and checks, and then it went into stealing cars. He was in and out of juvenile detention centers and prisons for about 17 out of his first 32 years of life. The main causes of him going to juvenile detention centers or prison was stealing, pimping, or forgery of United States checks. Due to all this deviant behavior and being in and out of prison and juvenile detention centers, he ended up having antisocial behavior. He ended up suffering from rejection, instability, and psychic trauma. Manson's last days in the detention center, he sat there and ended up raping a detainee and had a razor blade to the guy's throat. In 1954, he was finally paroled, but was living with different family members. And then in 1955, he ended up marrying a waitress who ended up carrying his son, Charles Jr. And while that was going on, he ended up being incarcerated again in Los Angeles due to car theft. And during his prison time, I think it was in 1958, he was divorced. And being on parole, in 1958, he started pimping a 16-year-old prostitute. In the following years, he spent negotiating his charges on white slavery and forging a U.S. Treasury check. Then, in 1967, he was released after a year in the Federal Corrections Institute on Terminal Island. When he was up for release, he protested because he was happy with staying in prison and playing his guitar. Parole, he married a Mary Brunner, and soon after they were living together, there was eventually 18 other females that started living with them. And then shortly after that, the Manson family was formed. The family would kill white people and try to blame it on the blacks, just to please Manson, because Manson would preach about race wars that would start when the blacks rebelled against the whites. Now, he named the event Helter Skelter after the song on the Beatles' White Album. He thought there was a hidden meaning within the song and would also quote parts of the book of Revelation, and would also call himself Jesus Christ. Not long after, the family began planning to start a race war between blacks and whites. They would commit a murder and try and pin it on the other race. And in 1969, the murders began. In July of 1969, Tex Watson, who is a member of the Manson family, scammed a black drug dealer named Lotsapapa Crow for a chunk of money that the family could use towards the Helter Skelter scheme. For this incident, Crow threatened retaliation. After Manson found out, he went to Crow's apartment and shot him. And then the next day, there was a news report about how a Black Panther member got killed within the area. Manson thought it was Crow, even though Crow was not a Black Panther, and he also survived, but never reported the incident. In the last part of July, Manson and the family went to Gary Heineman's home, and he was an acquaintance of theirs, to steal some money that they thought he inherited. But after being held hostage for a few days, Heineman was killed. In August, one of the family members was caught with Heineman's car, a sword, and the murder weapon, and was arrested. Shortly after that, Manson told the family members that it was time for Helter Skelter to start, and told them to report to 10050 Celio Drive with orders to kill everyone there. Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Casaban were ordered to murder and mutilate J. Sebring, Stephen Parent, Abigail Folger, Wojciech Frykowski, and Sharon Tate and her unborn baby. And their bodies were not found until the next day by the maid, along with pig written in the victim's blood on the wall. Next day, following the Tate murder, Manson set out for a new home and new victims, which were Reno and Rosemary LeBlanca. Manson ended up leaving the family there to do the dirty work, which was separate them, tie them up, and murder them. After Leno and Rosemary were stabbed to death, the Manson family ended up going to jail over auto theft, but a few days later were released due to a mistake with the warrants. So, after being released, the Manson family ended up killing Donald Shea due to Manson believing he was a rat. The last murder that had happened within that era was Ronald Hughes. He was an attorney for Lisa Van Houten, which was one of the women that were on trial for the Tate LeBlanca murders. During the trial, Hughes disappeared, and before that, he was the attorney. He was very clumsy, never been a criminal attorney before, so it was something new for him. After the disappearance, the court didn't think much of it, so they just appointed a new attorney. But once they realized that he had been gone for longer than 10 days, they put out a search party for him. And come to find out, he was dead. But they didn't recover the body until 1971. In 1969 and 1970, the Manson family committed 5 crimes within that 1 year span. Now, before I get to my sociological perspective on the Manson family and the murders, I'm going to show you a quick clip of Manson and his feelings towards being guilty for these crimes.
There's no need to feel guilty. I haven't done anything I'm ashamed of. Maybe I haven't done enough. I might be ashamed of that, for not doing enough, for not giving enough, for not being more perceptive, for not being aware enough, for not understanding, for being stupid. Maybe I should have killed 400 or 500 people, then I would have felt better. Then when I felt like I really offered society something.
Have you never felt remorse for the crimes you committed?
What crimes? I told you I haven't committed any crimes. I don't break laws. There's no need to break a law. Why should I break the law? I'm in God's will. Do you feel guilty?
Say this. Manson never physically murdered anyone. So he was technically not a serial killer. He was actually just associated with murder, pretty much murder proxy. Murder is defined as when the murderer as a murder in which the murderer does so at the behest of another, acting as his or her proxy, in which, for example, the family killing for Manson's behalf considers him to be murder by proxy. Looking back on everything through Manson's life, you have the nature versus nurture aspect you can look at, which would be considered, he'd actually be in the middle. Like, there was no either or that really affected him the most, because his mom really wasn't there for him because she was an alcoholic prostitute. There was a lot that went on in his childhood. He learned from an early age how to manipulate people. And then after just being rejected by his mom, he lived out on the streets. So he was affected by both environment and not having the love and affection from his mom like he was supposed to. You know, he grew up with a hard life. And then you look at the race issue. He thought the Beatles song was about race inequality, even though it wasn't. So he thought that that message he got was the hidden message. He just thought that he should do something about it and create a race war. He thought he was going to be a hero, and that's not how it turned out to be. And with that song causing so much inspiration for Manson, you know, he sat there and was able to plan these crimes. You know, and you can say with the social structures of it that the racial conflicts caused pressure to make him commit them. You know, he wanted to commit these crimes to, you know, start a race war, do what Helter Skelter thought he should do.